Hello and welcome to the Stage Door. We're continuing our series with the Graham Academy, and it has been such a treat so far. And this week we have Romano Di Nilo of Come From Way currently, and of Central Newfoundland, Grand Falls, but Cornerbrook people don't hold it against him yet. Uh, so welcome to the show, Romano.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's fantastic to have you on, and we always start with this question. You know, with all of our different artists, we've had a magician, we've had one of your Come From Way co-stars, Patrina Bromley, on the show, and we've had Johnny Harris, of course, stand-up comedy and TV. So
Funniest man in TV.
The Once and Sherman Downey. So we've had a nice variety. And we always start with the question of what inspired you. What was that first moment that you said, I can do this for the rest of my life. I can go into this as a career.
I was, I guess it's even before I started playing, my uncle was in a well-known group in the 70s. And my mom's originally from Port-au-Port, where a lot of musicians are from, in the West Coast, and they all played music, so I kind of grew up around it. But around 5 years old, I went to see my uncle play at the Arts and Culture Center in St. John's to see the Carlton Show Band, which was this group, and my uncle was playing the drums. And I remember being stage left, and I was looking at my uncle because we didn't have a seat in the audience. We're watching the show from stage left, family and friends kind of thing. And I just saw my uncle play drums, and I thought, I mean, he's a grown-up dude, and like I was just this kid. And you can do that? That's what I want to do. So I got some drums for Christmas that year. But that was the aha moment. I was pretty young.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly great to have all of that. You know, Newfoundland is such an amazing musical culture. You know, it really is, I think, a wonderful thing that we're able to constantly be around music, you know, and Port-au-Port is a great example of that. Codroy Valley was Sherman Downey. He had family from there, and it's the same thing. All these musicians, and so many of whom were, you know, they learned as they grew. They didn't learn from a teacher. They didn't necessarily learn from sheet music at all. So it's quite amazing to see the culture of it, just kind of something in the water. It's the same.
Yeah, something in the water, but yeah, I'm the only person in my family. I mean, if I asked my grandmother back in the day, you know, who played what, she'd just go on for 20 minutes. But she ended, you know, she had the French accent of the West Coast. No. So she'd end it all. She'd go for 20 minutes, you know, oh, your mother, she sing like a canary. And your cousin Dougie, he played the fiddle something good. Blah, 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 blah. She's going on and on and on. And at the end, she'd say, of course, we all plays the guitar. Like, you know, of course, we all breathe air. I mean, I did my degree at Mon, and then I did a master's at McGill. And I was the first person to read music, basically, let alone, you know, study music. But it's great for me as a performer because, you know, all of those people learned without a formal education, and they're phenomenal. They're so good. So I still can't hold a candle to them. So I keep trying.
Well, there you go. Right. I know I was in a short film about Emile Benoit, of course, from Port-au-Port Way. And it's, you know, he was just doing his own thing. And of course, Figgy Duff for him, you know, found him.
Oh,
and
yeah.
all of a sudden he was I think, in his 60s, I think, when he started touring around the world with this rock band from Newfoundland.
Yeah,
you know?
he grew up across the street from Mom.
Well, there we are. And so looking at your, you know, your career since those root moments, one of the big shows that you were a part of at numerous different locations was a show about another Atlantic performer, Stompin' Tom, as music director.
That wasn't the show I thought you were going to say.
There you
Yeah,
go. That one's coming soon.
yeah, Stomp and Tall. That was a really fun show. I did a lot of theater in Toronto after my master's, and I was lucky enough to sort of latch on to this awesome um, director, Chris Abraham, who's pretty large in the Stratford theater these days. But we were both sort of starting out within a few years of like out of school, and he was very determined and confident, and he's a super guy who we just did a lot of avant-garde, cutting edge theater. Um, and I sort of found myself specializing in doing the things that people don't know what they need. So
Mm.
like we just have this idea. Here's the idea, but I don't know what. It's like I got it. I'll figure it out. So that led to Stomp and Tom, the lighting designer for all the shows we were doing with him. Was the lighting designer for Blythe Festival. Um, and Jonathan Monroe, I don't know if you know Jonathan. He was a big factor in this. We were best friends in high school, and he wanted me to do a show for him at Can Stage. And so the artistic director of Blythe called me up and said, "I want you to do this show. Here are the dates." And Jonathan's was ending at the first day of the new show, Stomp and Tom. And I was like, I can do it. I just can't do the first day, you know. And he's like, sorry, we don't make any exceptions for anybody. We're just gonna move down the list. And so I talked to Jonathan. I was like, this is a whole summer worth of work. I don't know if I can turn it down. You know, I don't know if I can do your gig. And he's like, do you mind if I call him? I said, sure, I don't care. Go ahead, call your artistic director for Blythe. See if I care. And Jonathan, I was supposed to play drums in it. And by the time Jonathan finished talking to the artistic director of Blythe, they moved the whole schedule by a day, and I was now a music director. So I don't know what Jonathan said, but it worked. And I ended up doing that for 3 years, which is kind of neat because the band my uncle was in that I fell in love with playing used to tour around with Stomp and Tom. So he knew some people in my family. We didn't play with Stomp and Tom. There's a guy who played him, but he did come see the show. And that was neat because it was just straight ahead playing Stomp and Tom stuff, which is, you know, as easy as you can get. Really fun and super great music. But in between all the scene changes and stuff, you'd go back to when Stomp and Tom was 5 years old. So a child actor would come on stage, and it'd be a scene of him at 5 and his mom, and his mom leaving him, you know, all these sad stories in his life. And in those transitions, I had a whole other setup of found metal and weird sounds. So I would play all of these sort of esoteric. So it would be straight ahead, nice and easy, but the theater stories ended up being a lot more avant-garde and stuff. It was a really fun show to work on.
Yeah, that sounds like really quite interesting, and I see why it kind of made waves. And it's interesting that, you know, it started in Blythe and then ended up kind of coming it to a maritime festival with Charlottetown Festival. So
Yeah, that was fun.
that's great, and I think that's quite interesting to kind of be in both your worlds. You know, as a percussionist that's, you know, trained to go to, you know, mostly kit stuff and, you know, rudimentary rhythms with the Stomp and Tom music, and then to kind of flex the other muscles and say, okay, what can make this really cool noise? Oh, this
Hmm.
sheet of metal, this
Yeah, well,
pole.
this goes from Bud the Spud to a scene where his mother leaves him. So let's try to figure out a transition here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, speaking of Jonathan Monroe, he's worked with the Graham Academy. One summer he did a workshop with some of our
Oh,
students
right, with Tracy.
here. Yeah,
Right.
with Tracy, and it was a real treat having him. And you know, of course, John is no stranger to the creative side of the musical mind as well, with the shows he's developed through the years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a national treasure.
That's for sure. And Speaking of national treasures, I think you certainly can qualify for that as well. Looking down through, uh, you know, I do have to ask about one show that was nominated. You were nominated for a Dora Maver Award for a show called Boxhead, and I didn't read up on this show because I want to hear
James Lipton here.
firsthand what's the show about. What is Boxhead?
That was with the director I talked about, who is now at Stratford. But at the time, I just left Montreal. I finished my master's there, and my goal was always to move to Toronto and whatever making it is, find out what that definition is. Um, and at, there's a theater director, very well-known guy named Bill Glasgow, who was associated with the National Theatre School in Montreal. My roommate in Montreal while I went to McGill was Alan Hocko from Republic of Oil. So both of us were like really tight friends, and I went to McGill, he went to National Theatre School. And at the time, I spent more time at the National Theatre School than I did at McGill. I practiced a lot, but all the socializing and stuff, I sort of, for me, music school was just a training thing, and there's so many different elements of ethnomusicologists and composers and theory people and historians, and like I was just concentrating on performing. And at the National Theatre School, it was a very performing centric place, so I've got a lot of insight, and I learned a lot just from watching their classes and stuff, which they let me do. And Bill Glasgow used to teach there, and he was starting a new company called Montreal Young Company at the time, which was a group of not professional actors and not people from National Theatre School, but for people that sort of just left National Theatre School or Concordia or from Toronto or wherever, and this is their first sort of professional gig. Would I like to be performer and composer in residence, sort of thing? And I said no. I'm like, no, I want to move to Toronto, and I need to stay on my path. But his protege, his associate, not conductor, associate or director, ended up living in Toronto, and it was this guy, Chris Abraham. And so he was like, I'm doing this show called Boxhead. I got your name from Bill. It's about a geneticist who wakes up with a box attached to his head. So it's a cardboard box. And so when the light comes up on stage, it's just this guy in a lab coat with a box on his head. And there's two voices. There's like a narrator and an actor. So you hear, one morning, a young geneticist awoke to find a box secured to his head. And then the actor goes, oh my God. And what the audience doesn't know is there's a mic inside that box, and he's doing both voices. He's doing the narrator and the actor. And the stage manager is switching a button to change the voice from like godlike voice to a cartoon type voice. So from the actor's point of view, he's going, one day, a young geneticist awoke to find a box secured to his head. Oh my God. And you hear as the audience, one morning, a young geneticist awoke to find a box secured to his head. And the whole play is this really, cutting edge theater of he, at one point he clones himself, so there's two actors on stage, and then the narrators get into an argument. It's crazy. It was really fun, but I was in charge of designing, composing, and performing. It was a 3-person show, 4-person, 5-person show. Lighting person, stage manager, me, and 2 actors. There's no intermission. It was a 60-minute show. We did it at Pass Marais and Factory and Buddies. And that first time we did it, the Doras didn't really, we were nominated for 7 Doras, I think, that show.
Wow.
And I ended up doing a whole soundscape of basically you have the narrators and the doctors, and the narrators are this esoteric godlike creatures, which they end up being, and the doctors are sort of cartoony and they're in boxes. So I went to IKEA I actually got kicked out of IKEA by I walked in and I was hitting drawers, these wooden, the wooden organization drawers. So because I didn't want it to be wood blocks or anything that recognizable. I just wanted it to be wood sound. So I found a bunch of these drawers and I mounted them and I cut into them to make different sounds. And I found like little pieces of barrel lats, like the arced pieces of wood from a barrel, and just cut up and they sound like a little xylophone, but funky. I made a little log drum. And then for the narrators, I had this wall of, um, it ended up being a little bit of what I use in Stomp a Tom, but most of the instruments I found at a welder's school. So if you at welder school, you have to actually, do a weld and you get graded on it and pass or fail and all that stuff. What I didn't realize as a kid is that, like say they're welding a T, so you have a piece of metal and a piece of metal and they weld it. Well, the instructor tells you if you pass or fail by heating this piece of metal here and bending it. And when it breaks off, that angle tells you how strong the weld was and if you pass or fail. So that's fine and dandy for the welder. But for me, these make really good instruments, these bent pieces of metal. And when you hang them and hit them, it's like the most spooky wind chimes. So, and then so two actors on stage like this, let's say that's their whole height. Like their heads are up here and they have boxes on them. And then up here, there's a window. So it's all black in the back of the stage. They're standing here, and there's a window in the blacks where I'm perched with all my instruments, and it's flooded in black light, and I have two white gloves. So during the show, when the geneticist then clones himself, and he's trying to figure out what he is in life, you have these two floating hands playing all of these found instruments, um, basically, I guess, expressing the mood and what's on their mind. And there's the two geneticists then dance together. It's all sorts of weird stuff that happened, but it was so bizarre. I don't think Toronto had ever seen anything like it. And that was my first show, so it was pretty good. For a 200 seater, these types of halls, but really reputable and really happy to be involved with those theaters that developed so many different actors, and pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Passe Muraille has been a major for the type of work that has been developed there is quite amazing. Even though it's these kind of small spaces. So building on that, were you always kind of the type of person that you just heard sounds and everything? Was that something that you inherently just creatively was always there? There was always something about like, oh,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I don't even necessarily think I'd be a percussionist. I'd be into something to do with sound, storytelling. Um, Don Weary, one of my teachers, probably from 13 till about 22, he had one word on the wall of the studio where everybody took lessons, and it just said "listen." That's the number one um, tool to develop as a musician, is to listen. And he ran sound symposium, and there were these deep listening workshops, and he would do things like, "This is a really good exercise. I want to get all of you to try it with your family." Oh, maybe they don't have it anymore. Now they have like Bluetooth keys for your door at home and stuff. But if you have actual keys, what he would do is you get all the percussionists at Mon to sit in the circle, and we gave them all our keys, and we had keys to the practice rooms, keys to our house, keys. So it was pretty sonorous material to work with. It wasn't just the one key and a furry fuzzball thing. So he'd take all the keys and he'd get us to close our eyes, and he'd have this pile of keys, and he'd pick out a key at random, and he'd walk around behind us. And as he's walking around, he'd jingle the keys. And if you thought it was yours, you could raise your hand, keeping your eyes closed. And so you couldn't tell if anyone was raising their hand. And he'd be really gentle when he's putting it down, so you couldn't tell if he was putting it down. And at the end, you open your eyes and realize most of us had our keys. We recognized the sounds of our keys. And I remember my dad, when we go to Canadian Tire on Elizabeth Avenue, and I was like 4 or 5, Dad would, like, what it's like today, we'd both walk in, and I'd go to the toy section, and Dad would go do whatever he needed to do. And I'm like 5 years old, running around. But I always knew where Dad was because Dad had this habit of like circling his keys in his hand, right? So I just remember like being there and going, oh my God, where's Dad? And I just go, oh, he's over here, and I'd find him from the keys. Um, so when he did that exercise, he's like, these are industrial sounds. These are sounds or sound pollution um, that you map to, you actually recognize, and you're not even aware of it. Like it's pretty interesting. So from an early age, I just thought sound was um, such a huge tool. Like I notice it when I go into architecture, or you're walking in the subway, and then all of a sudden there's a little circle, and everything starts to bounce. I'll have to stop, and I'll show a friend the trick, with these little amphitheaters. I say, go to this wall over here, and he stands over here, and I'll be over here, and I'll go, hello, and you can hear it because it's bouncing off the walls, even though it's like 16 feet apart. Um, Little frequency things that I notice, but and just learning how to use them in storytelling. So, like in theater, you can provide sound effects for things, but you can also help drive the drama. For example, if something scary is happening on stage, I could place a speaker underneath the audience and emit certain frequencies that just make you uneasy, that you're not even aware are being made. That's part of being a sound designer and storyteller. Or little sweeteners, they call them. So if there's a sound effect that is scary, you can bump in a little bit of a sound of like a bear or a cat, like some sort of a growl, and not totally audible, but your brain will recognize it and have a fear response. So it's neat to find out these little tricks and stuff. But yeah, and even my percussion teacher in McGill was hung up on sound. We'd have a multiple percussion setup, solo percussion piece, and we'd start it on the first day. And let's say it was a cowbell, a floor tom, and a cymbal, for argument's sake. I'd show up with the piece of music ready to learn it. And he's like, no, 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 no. We have to select the instruments first. And he had like 16 cowbells and 12 cymbals and 8 floor toms. And we'd spend the first 2 lessons selecting the soundscape of what this piece is going to be. So in percussion, especially, it's always a lot of color. And the color is obviously important for different aspects of storytelling and music.
That's some excellent points, I think, about that little bit of the behind the scenes of music and score creation. I always find it wonderful. Like tension is one of my favorites in a movie or something, because you could just tell when something bad is going to happen, or when the director and music designer want you to think something bad could happen, just because it's
Yeah.
that little dull roar,
Yeah.
whether it's a growl, whether it's something just so quiet, but you're just
Mhm.
totally like, oh no, what's going to, it gets in your
Yeah.
stomach, it's
Yeah.
amazing the power of those extra sounds that can be there. And kind of stretching into now a bit more, I guess, traditional percussion playing. A lot of our students watching today are involved in musical theater, and you've been involved in 2 fairly large musicals, and the first one was Wicked. So what was the process like for that? One of actually Violet asked, what is the audition process for getting into an orchestra for a show, and how does it differ?
It's different than classical music. Classical music, there's a job posting, and you audition with 100 other people, and you win or you don't win the job. It's a lot less structured. It's more to do with contractors. Contractors hire orchestras. So if I'm a producer, I'm going to fund this show, XYZ. So I assemble a team to hire everybody else. So I hire a contractor for the musicians. That person is in charge of getting our musicians. Casting director. They're in charge of getting the casting. I might have ideas of people I want, but how you get to those casting agents and how you get to the contractor is always a mixed bag of luck and perseverance and a bunch of skills of just being personable asking for what you want instead of wishing, um, talking to the people that do the thing you want to do instead of talking to your friends about doing the thing you want to do. You know, you can do a lot of talking about what you want to a lot of people, but you know that energy that you're putting out isn't necessarily going to get you there. You should be trying to figure out, you know, if I want to be a percussionist in a musical, you know, who who's doing that thing? Oh, I met that guy Romano. What's, you know, what do you suggest? I'm like, well, you know, do you want to go to school? Do you want to, you know, you want to be a definitely just this? Do you want to be varied as a as an artist? Um, if you have a singular passion on one single thing, then try focusing all your energy into that, because um, you know, wherever you put your energy, you'll get there quickest. I did a um, I have very low attention span, so I ended up doing all of these different things that like I started out as a drummer at 5 and switched to percussion at 16. I did nothing but percussion until 33. I did play drum set during that time, but be for like a friend's album or like or the
Hmm.
play with the orchestra, like Kitchener Waterloo Symphony as a drummer. But I'd never be like I am freelancing as a drummer. Um, and then so Wicked, what happened was there's an example of getting in to see that contractor. I was having a talk with a friend of mine. I just finished most of my work. I had 3 pillars of work in Toronto. There's theater, there's dance accompaniment. So dance makers, Toronto Dance Theater, Peggy Baker. Um, every morning I would just play for classes, which was super fun. And then the third pillar was classical music. So I played with um, Canadian Opera Company, Toronto Symphony, quite a lot. And then I was talking to a friend of mine about finances. So I was like, you know, I'm playing everywhere I want to play in Toronto, but saving for a house, especially in Toronto, you know, the prices in Toronto are crazy. You know, is there something I'm missing because other people I seem to be able to do it? So, you know, I employed my own advice, you know, find out the thing you want to do and ask the people that are doing it. So she was like, well, you're doing everything except music theater here. And why don't you get into music theater? It's another avenue of income. And I thought, you know, I played like 30 musicals in Newfoundland between the years of X, Y, and Z. But I never thought of it after I left to do my master's. Like it was just, you know, legit, you know, I'm going to be a classical musician. Um, but does it pay? You know, and they're like, oh yeah, it's the same as the opera. I'm like, oh, wow. Well, how do I get into it? And she said, well, there's a brand new show in Toronto. This is 2004 or 5 or something like that. And they said there's a brand new Toronto show called Wicked. So this was the national tour. So it had been on Broadway for 6, 8 months, just started. No one knew what kind of hit it was going to be yet. Excuse me. So the national tour was opening and starting in Toronto, and then it's still on tour today. So, you know, it was the national tour being put up. And she's like, you know, come by, talk to the percussionist. Maybe you can ask him if you can sit in the pit and watch him play. And then, you know, you get to know them and tell them that you're interested in subbing. Subbing being, you know, if they're sick or if they have an engagement and the contractor lets you leave, then you're allowed subs. So they weren't allowing subs because it was a brand new show. And I knew the percussionist, and actually just spent 3 weeks playing with the guy in another show that wasn't a musical. And so I was like, I feel like that resource is maxed out. Like, who's the drummer? Maybe I can sit with him. So I find out who the drummer is. They ask, and he is fine with me coming in and watching him play. So it turns out he's from New York, and in my head, oh, it wasn't going to help me in Toronto. Like he wasn't going to talk to the contractor in Toronto. So I felt like, oh, here I am. I just walked into the Murgish Theater. I'm sitting in the pit. I'm watching this guy. I might be wasting my time because it's not really going to help me with the job. But I'll sit and watch anyway. And all of a sudden, the music started, and Wicked, um, when it came out, was a was a chapter turning in Broadway. All of these, I mean, there's Aida and stuff, but there are flashes of it. But mostly, you're looking at vaudevillian um,
Mhm.
orchestrations and stuff, and some rock things, but they were pretty tame. And then when Wicked came out, it was just like this hard hitting, crazy thing. So the contractor in New York was sort of like, well, if that drummer left, I don't have in my catalog of players someone that can do that. I didn't know this, but I watch, and he starts to play, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. Oh, the drum book is really, really hard. Oh, I'd love to do this. And then it turns out the original drummer for Wicked, 6 months into the run, or 8 months into the run, before they knew it was a hit, was asked by Phil Collins to play drums for Tarzan on Broadway. So he left Wicked, a life gig.
Ooh.
The guy who I met and sat with in Toronto ended up being the Broadway drummer. So all of a sudden, he brought my name into the mix. And then the very next time they needed a drummer for the tour, there's a brand new tour opening up. It was the second tour, so they asked me to start that. I got a call 3 years later from a random meeting, um, but I had to audition. So um, uh, I was going to that tour that I first watched was coming back around to Toronto 2 years later. New drummer. I was to meet this drummer, sit with him again, and sub for him. So it was sitting in Toronto from like October to January. Big, big sit down. And I was going to play 12 shows over those multiple months. So here's the thing, it's the hardest part, getting into the business. You got to start as a sub. And subbing is definitely the hardest job on Broadway. It is, uh, for example, this is what it took to learn Wicked.
Mhm.
I I meet him. I get the book, which is sacred. You don't get a copy of the book through email or whatever. Like, and they hoard it. So I knew I was playing it. I wasn't even allowed to see it for months. And I'm like, I could be preparing. So they come into town. I ended up lifting a lot of the recording. I spent, God, 20 hours just at Live actually, transcribing the drum set book. The cast recording is rarely like the actual show because they record that in the first week of its life, and things change before um, it settles. So finally, I get a book. I booked a studio for 6 weeks without work. I booked 6 weeks off work, and as a freelancer, that's pretty tough. And I had a practice room where Metric was rehearsing, actually, in Toronto. And I set up this drum set, and I had to measure all of Darcy's drums because I couldn't arrange any of the drums ergonomically. He's this tall, lanky, gorilla dude, and I'm like, so I had to learn like that. As a sub, you're not allowed to play like yourself and be like, I can play this better. You can't do that. You have to play like the person that's playing. So if they tend to rush, you have to tend to rush. Like the whole success as a sub is if you walk out of there and one of the local musicians is talking to another musician saying, "Oh, that drummer was pretty good," and the other musician goes, "What? Darcy wasn't here?" Like that's the key. Even if Darcy's not great, you have to just match exactly what's happening. So I had to learn his fills, things that aren't stylistically my thing. Um, and then you don't have a rehearsal. So you walk into Ed Murvish Theater one day in black, walk down to the pit, open the door with 2,500 people sitting down. I walk into the booth and I sit down and I play the drums for the first time and play the show for 3 hours. So it was 5 or 6 hours a day for 6 weeks, just learning the book. And it's not like, you can play and go, hey, I get this right 9 times out of 10. It's just got to be 10 out of 10. Um, Little did I know that each job I do, I seem to have to do this kind of learning thing. It's always like I'm a percussionist. I'm learning drum set. I'm a drum set player now. Now I'm learning boron. Like it's always this cycle. So I played in the very first show. Great story. They decide to hire Darcy as well to sit in the drum booth with me to take notes. So I show up, nervous as hell, haven't eaten all day, you know, afraid I'll throw up, and trying to eat like mixed nuts. And I show up, and Darcy's there. I'm like, "What are you doing here? Are you just getting some stuff and leaving?" And he's like, "No, no, no. They asked me to stay and take notes." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So we're in a booth. It's a drum house, and the drums are in it. There's a door. You have to open the door, walk in. There's a ceiling and everything. Like it's a full room with plexiglass in the front half, and I can see the conductor's feet, and that's it through the glass. So I have monitors for the conductor, and Darcy's knees would be like, where my hands are, like right here. Like he's pointing towards me, and his knees are right here. Like it's the small little space, and he's like, you know, but except he's like this. He's got this. It's like, and so it starts with ba 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 boom, ba, ba, and he's like ba 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 ba, and he starts to write. And the first act for Wicked is an hour and a half, and it's some of the hardest music. I had band-aids on every finger, and I'd never done this before. There's 2,500 people. Um, you know, Playing with Toronto Symphony or Canadian Opera Company was a lot less nerve wracking because I had experience with that, and this was like I don't have. Besides, you know, my God, one of the 20 musicals or 30 musicals I did in St. John's, like How to Succeed at the Arts and Culture Center, or Fair Lady, or My Fair Lady, or Cats, or Into the Woods. I was either on stage singing, or I was in the pit with the profession. But I wasn't going to get fired. So I play it, and he just starts to write. And then intermission happens, and he goes for 15 minutes, and I stay there. I don't use the bathroom. I don't take a drink. I don't do anything. I'm just looking at the second act, like I must have really screwed up. I must have really screwed up. He's just writing. He's just writing. Oh my God! I'm just gonna, I'll finish this, and I'll finally get, that reject finally that I've been hearing about. Like, just don't come back. So second act begins. It's like, Jimmy Fallon's thank you notes. And so there's a middle of the second act when Elphaba and Glinda are talking to each other, and talking about their feelings or something. And and I have like 5 minutes to sit there. So I'm like, he's right here. I'm just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I finally look over, and in Darcy's lap are about 25 thank you notes that he's filling out for some reason. Some sort of something happened. He's just filling out thank you notes. Notepad underneath it all. So I don't know how much he wrote on. I'm like, what? Oh. And I finished the second act. The conductor gets up. I'm there. We're both sitting in the booth. The conductor gets up, walks past the door, and the door has a plexiglass in it. And I see him, and he just sort of nods and walks off. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And then Darcy's like, he gets up, and he has his notepad, and he's like, okay, flip. I'm like, oh God. Yeah, Wizard and I, measure 14, just pull that back a bit. Yeah, great job. And I pretty much faint. Should have wore a diaper, but it was that was the first experience of like, wow. So then I did 12 shows, and each time it was far distant, uh, in like this island of time in which I hadn't played it for 2 weeks. And they made sure of that. So it'd be like I play it, and then 3 weeks later they get me to do another one, and then 3 weeks later I did two, So I'd never really do 8 shows a week or whatever. And then people on Broadway who go there to play, you go there and you sub, and people might sub in 5 or 6 shows. So you have to do that amount of work for 5 or 6 shows to play it once or twice. For a few $100s each time. It's not like it's going to pay. So you have to have a lot of instruments and practice a ton, and you don't know what you're going to play from night to night if you're going to get called at all. And it's definitely the hardest job in Broadway. There's several subs in our show have been fired, and there's no like reputation loss or anything. It happens all the time. It's not a good fit or whatever, but trying to find a percussionist that plays boron is super tough, or a boron player that plays percussion is super tough. And I just watch these guys, and they are like nerve demons. They this is what they do. And then after that, you might get a call on a workshop of something, and you develop relationships with up and coming writers. So basically, that was how I busted in on the Wicked thing, and how you get into, it's different with Come From Away. That's a different story, but yeah, it's a matter of just talking to the people that are doing it, meeting the contractors, which are the people that are responsible for hiring, sending them your resume, tell them you'll play for them. And you never know who you're talking to can lead to something. So it's just generally great to be kind and generous to anybody you're talking to, because you could be bad mouthing a store clerk or something, but they know somebody who, whatever. And even as a general rule, even if people deserve to be talked about, it's better just not to. But yeah, like I sat down with that drummer who I didn't think was gonna help me at all, and I ended up having a great night. I took him out for a drink afterwards, and we just talked about the business, and he liked my vibe. And when he got back to New York, I was the first person he recommended for a job that, should have went to a New Yorker first. Here I am sitting in Toronto. So yeah.
No, I think that's really a true. You have two wonderful lessons already in this little interview. One is listen to everything, and which of course you were taught by your teacher, and being kind and just going in with that attitude. I think it makes those connections so much stronger and so much more genuine, that you don't have to create something if you just go in being kind, and
Yeah.
it
It's
can
certainly the glue.
opportunities.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of that, I got an email from Grosso and Sarah Music's artistic director, David Maggs, who actually said, quote, "Romano was the guy who was nice to me when I would go into St. John's for lessons. Tell him I remember him very fondly." So that's David's words about you. So I think kindness is certainly something that has stood out for many people in meeting you, Romano.
That's
Um,
funny.
So before we dive into the next part, we have a couple questions, and of course we have to talk about a little bit about your experiences in Come From Away and your album Come From the Bays, which I
The
have
Bays.
behind me there. The great title. First off, we were treated earlier in this before we started the interview with some music and rhythm, and I would love if you were able to share a little bit of that again before we move into some more questions.
Any requests?
Now's your chance. Anyone?
Good Newfoundland tune? I came upon a charming girl, and Sarah is her name. Her parents wants a husband with riches, wealth, and fame. I haven't the fame and the riches and wealth have never come my way. For the night I went to visit my love, and true to keyhole say, hey, Sarah, Sarah, won't you come out tonight? Sarah, Sarah, the moon is shining bright. Put your hat and jacket on, tell your mother you won't be long, and I'll be waiting for you around the corner. Now Sarah is a girl like this, a girl you'll seldom see. She loves me only for myself and not for my money. Every night at 8 o'clock, she puts her needles away. And standing there outside the door, and through the keyhole say, Sarah, Sarah, won't you come out tonight? Sarah, Sarah, the moon is shining bright. Put your hat and jacket on, and tell your mother you won't be long. And I'll be waiting for you around the corner. Night, a little after 8, I crept up to her door. I whispered, Sarah, as I've often done before. I guess yes, Sarah, says a voice, and down I goes with a flop. As her mother kicked me round the shop. Sarah, Sarah, won't you come out tonight? Sarah, Sarah, the moon is shining bright. Put your hat and jacket on, tell your mother you won't be long. And I'll be waiting for you round the corner. The woman thought she killed me, and I let her think so too. As I laid her on the floor, sure, I scarce knew what to do. Alas, she says, alive or dead, my girl, I let him wed. So up I jumps, says, thank you, ma'am, and to my girl I says, hey, Sarah, Sarah, won't you come out tonight? Sarah, Sarah, the moon is shining bright. Put your hat and jacket on, tell your mother you won't be long. And I'll be waiting for you round the corner.
Well done. Fabulous. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
And of course, in looking at your bio on your website, it says you saw Come From Way and you couldn't pass on it. You know, you had to kind of go and be drawn back to those roots and be a part of that show. So what was it like to see this show, to see it, you know, come up as an opportunity and then, you know, be in it and be performing it for so many times?
I never saw it, but I heard about it. So I was, I was with my music director from Wicked, who's from Connecticut, and it was Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. I've never experienced American Thanksgiving. I mean, it's something that we'd hit or miss at home. Like it wasn't a huge deal. So I wanted to experience the huge Christmassy type deal that Thanksgiving is in the States. So he invited me back to his parents' place to spend Thanksgiving because we had the day off of Wicked, which is really rare. And so I traveled there. And he's from Killingworth, Connecticut, which is home to Goodspeed. And Goodspeed is a famous incubator and, you know, theater in its own right. But shows these days aren't made and rehearsed in New York. They are made and rehearsed other places because it's so expensive in New York. And by the time it lands in New York, it's sort of done. And it gives an opportunity to share costs. So if I'm the people at Goodspeed, so Goodspeed is responsible for the musical Annie. So the movie, the musical, everything, it was originally developed at Goodspeed, and then went to Broadway, became a hit, became movies, became all that stuff. So anytime it is Little Orphan Annie as a, you know, a musical with songs, Goodspeed gets a royalty still today. So it's a really good way for small theaters to invest in shows, help develop it, share the cost of going to New York. And so at Goodspeed in Killingworth, it had just been picked up as a reading. So all they did was a table reading. It wasn't at La Jolla yet. It wasn't in Seattle. It wasn't in Washington. It wasn't in Toronto. It certainly wasn't Broadway. So I show up weeks later, and I'm talking to an associate music director for Goodspeed, and he's like, "Where are you from?" And I go, "Canada." I know I've been touring with Wicked for 8 years, and no one ever asked me where in Canada. It was just, you know, I'm from one of the largest countries in the world. Oh, great. And never asked if it was the East Coast or West Coast or North or South or anything. And so I say that, you know, I'm from Canada, and he goes, "Where?" And I go, "Okay." One of the few Americans that will ask me where, thinking, you know, and they'll still not know where I'm from. So I say Newfoundland. And he goes, "You're from Newfoundland?" And I go, "Whoa, let's just, yeah." And he said, "Oh, we just had a reading here about the story that happened in Newfoundland called 5 Days in Gander," or whatever the first title was. And I'm like, "The 9/11 Gander story?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Oh, that would be a really good story. That'd be a really good story, huh? So I just sort of filed that away, and I mentioned to him, like, whoever's producing it and stuff, let him know I'm a musician, I'm a Newfoundlander, whatever. That never went anywhere, but always put it out there. And then Katrina got hired, and they did the first show in La Jolla. And so I didn't hear much about that. Like, I wasn't asking people how it was going or anything, but I did hear it was breaking records, and I did hear it was extended. And it was just the first, there's an intermission, there's different songs, there's different stories. Like, it wasn't finessed at all. And I knew that, like, I knew what the first production would be. And so, 50% of me is like, this is going to be crap because it's about Newfoundland, and anybody who treats Newfoundland is going to treat it like crap. And it's just like, it always has been. And the other half of me is like, but this is a really good story. Whose hands is this in? So when I heard it was extended, I went, you know what? I haven't seen it, but I have a feeling. So I contacted Katrina, and I said, do you have any underground recordings of it, or something I could just listen to? And she's like, no, I mean, I don't. Mention my name, Blonde. That didn't go anywhere. So then I went to Seattle. I heard that broke records, and it was extended, and it was being developed a little more. And by that time, a local musician from Wicked touring was picked up as associate music director. So he was in Seattle. So he knew my name. He never knew I was a Newfoundlander. He thought it was, he knew I was Canadian. And Canadian second, right? So I was just sort of like throwing words into the atmosphere, like, does anybody know anybody? Nobody. And then I went to, right after Seattle, I got it from an unlikely source. The sound designer, interestingly enough, for Wicked, his name is Tony Miola, and he's like one of the 3 most well-known sound designers on Broadway. He, like, the bulk of his career is definitely in the past. Like, he just doesn't need to work. That's why he's not working so much now, but he's investing in a lot of stuff. He's an original investor in Wicked. And he had come out to Houston to see the show and to clean it up. So all the department heads, director, choreographer, the music director in New York, they should all be coming to visit the national tours throughout the year, every now and then, just to make sure everything is the same as Broadway. It should be carbon copies, except tour is actually bigger theaters, 2,500 seaters to 6,000. On Broadway, you'll have 1,000, 2,000 max. So it's their moneymaker for sure. So the sound designer came out. That's the sound department's, like, it's for them to be nervous, not me. So I'm just playing. I knew they were stressed out, running around the theater, checking all the speakers and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, the sound designer's coming. Oh, they're stressed. I play my show, finish. I go to the hotel. I get my food. And it's like 11 o'clock at night, and this is my supper. And I'm eating, and I finish, and I go, I'll take the check. And she goes, oh no, it's been taken care of. And I'm like, what? It was like $40. and she's like, yeah, it's taken care of. And I went, oh, and I look over, and there's a table with the sound guys over there, with who I assume is the Tony Miola, and they're waving, including Tony. And I'm like, who are they waving at? Anyway, who paid for my meal? And I look over again, and then they're all waving, and I'm like, who are they waving? Who paid for my meal? And I look over, and they're like, Romano, come over. I'm like, oh, they're waving at me. And so I forget about who paid for my meal. I'm like, what's going on? They don't want me to meet Tony. Oh, that's cool. I get to meet a bigwig. So I'm like, hi, I'm Romano. And he goes, yeah, I'm a big fan of your playing. There's been many famous stories about Tony and the drummers of Wicked. So he was very generous and stuff. And then he was like, you're from Newfoundland. And I went, what? Yeah. I mean, I'm in Houston, Texas. And yeah, you didn't pronounce it correctly, but I was like, you know it exists. Like, that's really weird. And it turns out that he's in his like traveling years, and he's a big traveler, hiker. So he goes on these big hikes around the world, and he always has to fly over Newfoundland because it has to track through Gander airspace for for safety. And he always noticed it on the radar. It's like there's that big island down there. Like, what is Newfoundland? And he'd been thinking about it for a couple of years, and then he heard from the sound designers from Canada, or the sound guys, and he's like, "Well, where?" And in Canada, and they're like Newfoundland. He's like, "Oh, I got to meet him. I've noticed this island." So he had 1,000 questions for me, and I have a shared album on iPhoto of just like 200 photos of Newfoundland that I've collected of icebergs and Cape Lynn and just stuff you'd be interested in. I was like, here, I'll share the link with you. You can peruse at your leisure. There you go. If any questions, let me know. If you're ever going to Newfoundland, let me know. Great to meet you. That was it. 2 years later, they just finished Come From Way at La Jolla and Seattle, halfway through its development. I've been waking up every day. I toured for Wicked for 8 years, so I did 2,600 performances of Wicked. And I was ready to go. Like, I love the show. I love playing it, but 50 weeks a year on the road is wild. So I'd wake up every day and I'd just be like, put 2 feet over the bed and I'd sit down and I go, I'm looking for another gig. Please put it in front of me, just putting it out there. Say it out loud. That's all I'd say. I wouldn't obsess about it or anything. I was trying to find more names about Come From Away, but wasn't really successful. And I wasn't necessarily thinking of Come From Away. I was just like, I'm ready for the next thing. I get a call. I'm in San Francisco doing the show, and or an email. And it's Tony saying, "It's Tony. Are you? I have this show that you might be interested in. It's called Come From Away." And I was like, "What? What?" And it turns out he was a major investor in Come From Away. His best friend, who his goddaughter's mom, is the main producer, Sue Frost. So he was like, if you want to do this, just let me know. I mean, Wicked would be pissed that I'm poaching you, but let's see what happens. And so I I said, yeah. 6 weeks later, I found out that the contractor had already hired somebody. So I lost the gig. And this is where it gets tricky, right? Like I knew the producer, the boss, his best friend, but it doesn't matter because there are these chains of command. And unless everybody's talking to each other, which just doesn't necessarily happen, and a contractor also doesn't have to. It's their job to hire. So he hired someone else. Luckily, the Boron part from La Jolla to Broadway or Toronto had been fired 4 times, 4 different people, because they couldn't find the combination of theater experience, legit classical experience where you're following a click, and you're playing other percussion instruments. I play not lots, but other instruments other than the Boron that you use hands for and stuff. I also subbed the book on drum set on Broadway when they were really stuck. I can get one of my subs to come play for me, and I play the drum set book. So someone that's just can handle everything. So it wasn't even necessarily the best Boron player. They just needed somebody who could fit all of those roles. And every time they hired somebody, it just wasn't a fit in some regard. So I as far as I knew, I lost the gig. So that was it for a couple of months. I'm doing Wicked, and I lost that big gig, and it's nobody's fault. It's just that was it. Then they did Washington. That person was a new student, good Boron player, good percussionist, really good. I know him. We know him well now, but he didn't want to do it. He was like some show about and it was like the first week. It wasn't anything big, and he was just like, I'm going to go back to LA and be an LA percussionist. So he refused it. And then this other lady was hired, and again, couldn't get, like, producer couldn't say anything. So twice it flew over my head. I was just like, I had it cornered. So then finally, it's around Folk Fest in 2016, and I take a break from Wicked. I'm just up to here in Witches. So it's not even Witches. It's just the life, of like 13 semi trucks and flying everywhere and hotels. There's only so much bleach in a hotel room you can smell. So I'm home. I'm just taking in the folk festival. A really great friend of mine, Pat Boyle, is having his stag party, and so we had out. We just had the drinks and stuff. All very PG. And I'm sitting at a bar with Bob Hallett, who is from Great Big Sea. I knew Bob was associated with Come From Away, so I cozy up to him. I'm like, Bob, I've known Bob for years. It's like, in your busiest year of Great Big Sea, like your busiest touring year, what was the least amount of time you were home? And he was like, oh, geez, Romano, I only got to be home like 2 months of the year. And I'm like, 2 months, huh? That would be paradise. And he's like, what? It's like, well, I've been on the road for 8 years and I get 2, 3, 4 weeks max, right? And he's like, what? I'm like, yeah. So, like, and I'm trying to get off the road, but I'm not going to leave a gig. Like, I'm not going to leave. It was the best. Touring also pays better than Broadway, FYI. So it's like, I had the best chair. There's only one person that plays drums, and I was that guy for North America. So it was like, and it's still going. It's going to like 2028. So it's a, retirement gig kind of thing. But I need to go. And if I was playing something a little less visceral, I could probably get away with it. But so I just planted that seed in his head. So he went and talked to the music director, Ian. And it turns out that on September the 9th, Bob had called Ian. And that was the day, or a couple of days after the girl had been let go. And it was after Washington. It was right after Washington. No, Washington wasn't even done yet. So this person was going to be let go at the end of the run. And I was going to start in November for Toronto and then Broadway. So he called and he was like, Bob called and Ian said, yeah, I just happened to be calling him right now, like coincidentally. So it was like this little thing. And then he called and he said he wanted 9 examples of me playing excerpts from Come From Away. I had to have my metronome on. So for each track that I was playing for the audition on a recording, not a video, the metronome had to be audible because we played to a click track, and half the problem they had was people that can't play with a click track. So yeah, I can do that, sure. So I showed up at a friend's place, went to record it, started at 2 p.m. If it happened today, I would probably have it done by 2:30 or 3, send it off. But that night, it was the 10th of September, and I started at 2 and I finished at 11 p.m. There's no editing. I mean, no one to say that. I mean, but I didn't want to edit anything. So each of these things were like take 305, take 497, because I knew what it should sound like. But I mean, I just spent 10 years playing percussion in Toronto. Then I spent 8 years playing drum set on the road. And now they want me to play Boron. I mean, I couldn't have made this stuff up. Like I played it when I was 16, 17, 18. Back when I knew all the guys from Great Big Sea and they were starting, we were all playing. I was like, yeah, I can pick it up and I can go boop. As Patrina would say, stroke my eagle, tell me how good I am. Stroke my eagle, tell me how good, like that rhythm. I could do that, but it wasn't like, Sean McCann. So I did these like 300, 400 takes. At 11 o'clock at night, I'm like, this is as good as I can do it for the audition, and I send it in. Then on September the 11th, ironically, I get the call saying, you got the gig. It's an intent to hire. So I was invited to show up in Toronto on November the 6th to start rehearsals. And then they would have 7 rehearsals in which they could fire me at any time for 0 reason. So in those 7 services, all they had to say is thank you. They don't have to provide me with an explanation or compensation for leaving the big gig I just left, 'cause I have to call on notice. So I have from September the 11th until November 6th to do in what I did in 300 takes to do in 1. So I did what I did with Wicked. I took the rest of I put my notice in Wicked. I stayed home and I spent 2 months. I sat down and thought about it. I listened to myself and I looked at the music as they sent it to me. And it's like, you know, there's 2 things I can do. I can try to just be a really hot bar player. Probably not going to happen in 2 months. I can probably play the crap out of the show, like within the framework of the show, everything on the boron, if I put about 500 hours in, just from experience of playing and learning. So that's what I decided to do. So it's about 60 hours a week or more of like, and this isn't just like, you know, sitting here and trying to get everything even, how to hold it. Like there's so many different ways to hold this thing. But it also includes checking out YouTube clips and talking to people and watching people concerts and going to sessions and playing Irish sessions and just all that counted as hours. And then it was pretty intense. It wasn't stressful anymore just because I know how I learn and I knew it would be fine. You always still question yourself and stuff, but at the end of the day, flew to Toronto, did the first rehearsal. It was pretty clear after that, like, you know, I could nail the show after the 500 hours. And then I spent from November the 6th until present day. That album is part of that. To Come From the Bays was a reason to just sort of extend myself. And now that I can do the show, try to excel as a boron player, like that other boron players might want to check out. So I think I'm getting there.
Well, it's certainly amazing to think of the journey, and thank you so much for sharing those so honestly, you know, from Wicked and Come From Way, you know. And it is the case, you know, it's kindness, it's connection, and it's practice, you know. It's a big part of anything is to do that. And Come From Way, you play a lot of boron, but the ugly stick as well, which is a wonderful Newfoundland
Typecasting.
tradition. So we have 4 questions from our students that'll finish us up. Pretty straightforward ones, but I'll just find them and unmute them so they can ask. Our first question is coming from Max Pittman. All right, Max.
Hi. My
Hi.
question is, have you ever been in the middle of a show and an instrument just didn't work or broke?
Oh yeah, or hit the wrong thing. I remember in Wicked there's some electronics that I play, and I have to change patches on it. So it's like, you know, this tune I have to change patch to here, and you know, in the beginning it's monkey sounds. It sounds boing, 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 boing. It's just effects. But there's a huge gong like ba 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 ba, like these huge gongs, right? And it was like this moment with the 2 witches were like, oh, well, for the house. That's happened. In the very first show that I played, where the guy was taking notes, a stick flew out of my hand and smashed against the plexi, like right next to the guitar player, who's like the traveling guy. I was watching him like trying to freak out. I've had, I've played crash cymbals in an orchestra with one falling off, and it was during old Canada, and it was uh stand on guard for thee, and the big crash cymbals, and the strap broke, and the cymbal fell, and of course we're all on risers, so it's like the Yay! It was just, I have I was in Toronto Symphony, and we're playing Bruckner Symphony number 4, 4 movements, 2 percussionists, 1 timpani player, 1 crash cymbal player who plays 1 note in movement 4 after like 2/3 of the way through that 4th movement. So I go up to the conductor. I was like, Maestro, would you like me to sit off stage and come on stage during the break of the third, between the 3rd and 4th movement, like usually happens? But it's within their right for them to say you have to stay. And I was not expecting this. He's like, yeah, I'd like you to stay on stage. So I have to sit for an hour before I play that 1 crash cymbal. So I'm in tails, white bow tie, tails, and and you can, if you're in Roy Thompson Hall, it's 1,000+ people, and you know, you're the only person that's sitting off from the orchestra by yourself, stage right, and you can, you know, that pretty much everybody in the audience is like, he's been sitting there for an hour. What the hell is he doing? So I'm sitting there, and finally I have like 70 measures to count before I play. So I'm like 50, 51, 52, and it gets close to 70. Being the showman, I'm like, and just a little movement, you know, now Roy Thompson Hall's like, George, he's moving. Right? So I'm like, and I get up and I walk towards the table where the crash cymbals are. I'm like, 68, 2, 3, 1 cymbal. 69, another big cymbal. 2, 3, 4. Is it 69? And I walk. I missed it. I'm like, the conductor's going, and then I'm in tails, walking backwards to my chair, sit down, and wait for 15 minutes while the symphony is over. Everybody in that hall knew I made a mistake, and you know, it happens. It happens. I've heard the best of the best just face plant, but it's sort of how you recover from those things that, you know, make you stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always great to share those stories because I think everyone in the arts has them. So, Max, thanks for that question. And Romano, thanks for being so open and, and giving us some laughter. We actually have another question now about instruments. And this one is coming from Alistair. So, 1 second, Alistair just has to. There we go. All right, Alistair.
So hi, so I was wondering, so I have a baron, and I know that you play baron. So I find it harder to play my baron than like just playing the normal full kit. So I was wondering if you find other percussion instruments harder than, like, I don't know, the baron.
Yeah, baron is definitely. I find that it's a very easy instrument to start, but hard to do advanced stuff on. The learning curve is quick. It's like, oh, I can play boop, 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 but then it's tough. Drums, I find all the different instruments I find have their challenges. With drum set, it's independence, you know, the limbs and styles and like touch and feel. It's so different than any other instrument.
Yeah.
I found marimba pretty tough, like mallet instruments. That was the hardest for me, just being having a drum set background as a kid. But love the keyboard instruments. partially, I think I don't find one of them harder than another, but I find that the more I learn, the easier it is to learn another one of them. So like the skills you learn as a drummer are going to help you as a boron player. If you're playing boron, it's going to help you as a drummer. Right now I'm learning button accordion. So, I mean, there's a lot of people that want to kill me right now. Yeah, I mean, just enjoy the challenges of each individual instrument, because it's going to inform you on the next thing you do. And you'll have a point of view that other people don't have, like as a whole instead of separate. It's nice to, to learn your one thing, but it's also nice to be aware and have experience with a bunch of different things that people are doing in the room, so you have a way to relate to them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. You're welcome.
Right, another great question there. Thanks, Alistair. And of course, it's great that you're learning accordion, because of course, on your on the Come From the Bays album, you had Aaron Collis, who's just wild to to watch play, and Dwayne.
He did that album. Yeah, Dwayne's a buddy of mine.
A lot with Gross Our Music, actually. Dwayne's involved with a lot of our summer music with his musicality there. So it's certainly emerging of all those different connections. And the next question is actually, it's great that we're kind of talking about all the different instruments, because the next one's coming from Violet, and she's gonna give you a tricky one. I'll warn you.
All right.
Right, Violet, whenever
Take it away.
There we go.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was just wondering, what is your dream song to play and your dream show to play it in as a percussionist?
Okay. Oh yeah, I never thought of this. As a percussionist, it's definitely West Side Story. It's hard. And it was the first thing that we had to learn a part of it, the big mambo part. There's a bunch of orchestral arrangement for it as well, and sort of coming across it with the McGill Orchestra was like, it was the first thing that I really had been given, that I was like, I got to work on this really tough, like just put in a ton of hours, because it was really hard. And the percussion part for Wicked's pretty tough and stuff, but to me, it's a classic, tough percussion. As a drummer, I would say Dancing Through Life is in Wicked is like, and then Into the Ozdust thing, it's just nuts. It's just these big fills, and it's a joy to play every time. Or Loathing. What is this feeling? Yeah, because the groove is so cool. But yeah, that would be my favorites.
All right. Thank you so much, Violet, for that. And our last question is coming from Lily, who's with some familiar faces to you, I believe. Lily Smallwood.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
Of course, the second that we
Our dog has a question.
Yeah, Archie has a question too. Yeah.
So my question for you is, what is like the difference? Because I know in Come From What you played on the stage. So what is the difference between playing on the stage and in the pit? Well, I guess I should say, like, what are the pros and cons of being?
Yeah, definite pros and cons. I mean, it's funny because I didn't think there were many cons on stage, but it's surprising the number of musicians that I come across that wouldn't want the job just because it's on stage, which I find surprising. That, like one of them is a friend of mine who plays for Hoxley Workman. Like, he's on stage all the time. What's the difference? But yeah, so like for Wicked, for example, I'm in a pit. I am in a box. I could probably see maybe see the front row of the audience. Most times not. I could maybe see the balcony, but they certainly couldn't see me. I'd be working really hard. I like to call myself the engine of the show. I wasn't driving it, but I was definitely pulling it along. And it wasn't necessarily realized. So, and then as soon as the bows happened, the bows in Wicked was the hardest music in the show because everything hard is in it, and everybody's walking away. And by the time we finished the bows, just a quarter of the audience left. No one's listening, except for music theater people and artists and stuff. So it is what it is. Every little fill that I worked on is not going to be heard, and you got to realize that. With stage, it's another story. Walking out of the stage door of Wicked, there's barricades up. People are who are you? Because everyone's in the stage makeup, and they couldn't even tell who Elba is. So or Glenda might have black hair and she's in wigs the whole show, so you just think she's blonde and she can walk out the front door. And so people are shy asking who you are. So they walk out the door and they'll be like, "Who are you?" And, "Oh, I gave birth to baby Glenda." "Oh, who are you?" "I'm the drummer." Oh, there's like these collective 30 people there, and there'd be like the one 5-year-old full of empathy that would hear that and be like, "Oh, would you sign my book?" But then come from ways different because it's a smaller orchestra and we're all on stage, so that has its own challenges. We have to have these in-ear monitors. They're molded to our ears. They're shoved in our ears. So if actors are talking to us, on stage, I can't even really hear them because it's like them speaking to you through earplugs. Because I'm listening to the guitar part who's like 20 feet away from me. It's not an ensemble that I can just listen to. So there's a bit of that. It's just nicer to have the recognition to see the audience, like there it is. Downstage center playing an ugly stick was not my goal when I was doing my performance exam for my master's, but it's a lovely feeling to just walk out that stage door and everyone be like, "I know what you did." They might not know it's a boron or how that works and all that stuff, or what I played during the show when I was sitting down. But it's definitely nice to be one of a few instead of one of 20 odd, and it's also nice to just see the reactions. Even when I'm sitting on stage, it's like this is the stage and I'm sitting here. Like I'm on stage more than the actors, but I might be in the dark. But I can see everybody. It's really cool just to watch every chuckle. And it's definitely more inclusive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank
But
you.
cons. Also, in the pit, you're usually wearing blacks. You can walk in and out. You have your little Starbucks mug, like you're just drinking your coffee, you're playing your show. Some Broadway musicians that have played it for 1,000+ times will have a magazine, and like they have it memorized, and they can actually play and read the second chapter of the book of whatever. So like, there's none of that. You have to be, here I am. Doesn't matter if you have a cold or whatever. And in the pit, there's a little more anonymity, and people like that. They just sort of come in and plug in and leave. So that's a con, depending on what you're into. Long answer.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that. And Lily, thank you so much for the question. Another great
Thanks,
question.
Lily.
Thank you.
And that clues us up for this evening's trip to the stage door. So thank you, Romano, so much. What a treat to have you here, and thank you for your
Ian.
honesty and candid stories. They were really, really wonderful to hear. Of course, next week, come back to the stage door. We have with us the Tony-nominated actress Catherine Cox and David Evans, who is the current associate conductor for Wicked on Broadway, coming to us from New York City to be on the stage door through Zoom. So thanks again, Romano, and tune in next week to
right on.
hear some more. All right. See you, everybody.
Deadly. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.